Jimin exposed Jungkook's hidden truth on camera. The room froze instantly. "Stop the camera," Jimin said, too late. His voice cutting through the studio air like broken glass as the red light stayed on and the room froze, breathless, watching Jungkook's face drain of color. The silence had weight. It pressed against the walls, crawled across the floor, clung to the lenses pointed at them. Jungkook stood under the lights with his shoulders squared the way he did before a performance, except this wasn't a stage he could command. Sweat traced the line of his temple. He tasted metal. The applause that should have followed the segment never came. It died in the throats of the crew as if swallowed by a sudden winter. Jimin hadn't planned to say it like this. He had rehearsed the words in his head 100 times, in mirrors and in the dark, whispering them into his own palms. But plans dissolved when Jungkook laughed, soft, deflecting at the question meant to be harmless. Something in that laugh cracked a memory open. Jimin's fingers curled. He felt the old tremor, the one that came when truth demanded air. "You told me it was over," Jimin said, eyes fixed on the monitor that reflected them back as strangers. "You said there was nothing left to hide." A producer waved frantically from behind the cameras, mouthing no, no, no. The host shifted in her seat, smile glued on, waiting for a cue that never arrived. The room smelled faintly of hot plastic and coffee gone cold. Jungkook swallowed. His habit when cornered was to ground himself in physicality, feet planted, jaw set, breathing measured. It had worked for years. It failed now. "Jimin," he murmured, a warning and a plea braided together. He reached out, stopped himself, hands clenching at his sides. Jimin turned then, finally, and the camera caught the shine in his eyes. Not tears, yet but something sharper. Resolve. "You still have the contract," he said. "The one you told me you burned." A murmur rippled through the crew. The host's smile flickered. Contracts were poison words in rooms like this. Jungkook's mind raced, calculating angles, exits, narratives. He had learned early how to survive by splitting himself in two, the one the world saw and the one who carried the cost. The hidden truth lived with the latter. It throbbed now, insisting on daylight. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, and for a second the mask slipped, revealing the boy who had learned to carry silence like a shield. "I know exactly," Jimin replied. His voice steadied, anchored by a memory of a night years ago, rain streaking the windows, Jungkook packing with a phone pressed to his ear, whispering promises to someone he couldn't name. Jimin had learned then that love could coexist with erasure, and it terrified him. "I know why you flinch when your phone buzzes. I know why you won't sleep unless the door is locked twice." The camera zoomed in. Jungkook's breath stuttered. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob, and the room leaned closer, cruel and curious. The truth, when it came, did not arrive as a confession. It arrived as a fracture. "They still own the silence," Jungkook said quietly, "and I let them." Jimin's chest ached. He remembered the first time he noticed Jungkook's habit of counting steps between doors, seconds between sentences. A coping mechanism. A chain. "You let them because you thought you had to," he said. "Because you were scared. Because you were alone." The host cleared her throat, attempted control. "We're going to take a break." "No," Jimin said, softer now but immovable. "Not yet." The room smelled like ozone, like a storm about to break. Jungkook looked at the camera, then away. His fear wasn't of exposure, it was of consequence. Of the people who would wake up angry. Of the clauses buried in fine print that could erase years in a pen stroke. He had told himself protection was love. He had been wrong. "There was an agreement," he said. "Long before any of this, before you." He met Jimin's gaze. "I kept it because breaking it would hurt everyone." Jimin shook his head, a small, sad smile forming. "It already did." Time moved strangely then, stretching and compressing. The red light hummed. Somewhere a phone vibrated and was silenced. Jungkook felt the room not as an enemy but as a witness. He felt the old fear loosen, not gone, but challenged. "I'm done hiding," Jimin said, and the words weren't a threat. They were a vow, with or without you. Jungkook exhaled, a long surrender. He had spent years believing endurance was bravery. Standing here under unforgiving lights, he learned something else. "Then I'll tell it," he said. "All of it." The studio did erupt. It didn't gasp. It simply held them, suspended, as the truth finally stepped forward, fragile and unavoidable. And in that held breath, something shifted, irreversibly, between the two men, between the room and the silence it could no longer contain. The door slammed behind them the moment the broadcast ended, the echo ricocheting down the narrow hallway like a gunshot, and Jungkook finally let his mask fall. "What the hell were you thinking?" he snapped, spinning around, his voice raw and shaking as the red ON air light flickered off behind the glass. "You didn't just expose me, Jimin, you lit a match in a room full of gas." Jimin didn't flinch. He stood there with his back straight, hands trembling only slightly, nails biting into his palms as if pain were the only thing keeping him grounded. "You think I don't know that?" he shot back. "You think I didn't feel every second of that room staring at us like vultures?" "Then why?" Jungkook stepped closer, too close, the heat between them crackling. "Why do it like that, on camera, in front of everyone?" "Because you would have run again," Jimin said, his voice breaking through the anger like a fault line. "Because every time I try to talk to you in private, you shut down, you disappear, you hide behind that damn smile. I was tired of chasing ghosts." Jungkook laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think I enjoy this?" He raked a hand through his hair, packing like a trapped animal. "You think I wake up every day wanting to remember what I signed, what I owe, who's watching?" The hallway smelled of disinfectant and stale air. Somewhere far away, a door opened and closed, laughter drifting in from a different world where nothing had just exploded. "You told me you were free," Jimin said quietly. "You looked me in the eye and said it was over." "I thought it was." Jungkook's voice rose, cracking. "They promised. They said if I stayed quiet long enough, if I played the role, they'd let it die." "And did it?" Jimin asked. Silence, heavy, accusing. Jungkook stopped packing. His shoulders sagged as if something inside him had finally given up. "No," he admitted. "It followed me, everywhere, every stage, every interview, every time you reached for me and I hesitated." Jimin swallowed hard. Memories flooded back, Jungkook pulling away from cameras at the last second, his smile vanishing the moment the lights went out, the way he flinched at unfamiliar faces. It all clicked now, and the realization hurt worse than the betrayal. "You should have trusted me," Jimin said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay steady. "I wasn't your enemy." "I know," Jungkook whispered. "That's what scares me." Footsteps approached. A manager appeared at the end of the hall, face pale, phone pressed to his ear. "This is already blowing up," he said sharply. "Social media's on fire. We need statements. Now." Jungkook clenched his fists. The familiar instinct kicked in: contain, control, survive. "I'll fix it," he said automatically. Jimin stepped in front of him. "No," he said, firm. "You're not fixing this by burying it again." The manager frowned. "You don't understand what you've started." "Oh, I do," Jimin replied, eyes blazing. "And I'm done pretending the cost doesn't matter." The manager scoffed and walked away, muttering into his phone. The hallway felt smaller once he was gone, the walls pressing in. Jungkook stared at Jimin, really looked at him, and saw not accusation but fear. Fear of losing him, fear of watching him disappear behind secrets that were never meant to be carried alone. "If I tell everything," Jungkook said slowly, "they'll come for me, for us." Jimin's lips trembled, but he nodded. "I'm already here. I didn't expose you to destroy you. I did it because I couldn't stand watching you destroy yourself." Jungkook's breath hitched. He had faced screaming crowds, ruthless executives, impossible expectations, but nothing terrified him like this quiet truth standing in front of him. "I don't know how to be brave without hiding," he confessed. Jimin took a step closer, their foreheads almost touching, voices dropping to whispers. "Then don't be brave alone." For a moment, the noise of the world faded. No cameras, no contracts, just two people standing in the wreckage of a truth that refused to stay silent. Jungkook closed his eyes, the weight of years pressing down on him, and nodded. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "Then this time I stop running." Outside the hallway, The storm they had unleashed continued to grow, unstoppable now, and neither of them knew who or what it would claim first. The car door shut with a dull thud, sealing them into a silence that felt louder than the studio had been. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the city lights into trembling lines, and Jungkook stared straight ahead as if the windshield were a confession booth. "You didn't answer me back there," he said at last, voice low, brittle. "When I said they'll come for us." Jimin leaned against the door, arms crossed tight over his chest, the vibration of the engine humming through his bones. "Because I'm not afraid of them," he replied. "I'm afraid of what happens if you keep letting them own you." Jungkook let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, but carried no humor. Easy to say when your name isn't tied to clauses that can erase your life overnight. Jimin turned sharply. "Don't do that. Don't make me the reckless one and you the martyr. I've paid my share too." His voice cracked. "I paid every time you shut me out, every time you chose silence over me." The words landed hard. Jungkook's jaw tightened, muscles jumping beneath his skin. "You think silence was a choice," he snapped. "It was survival." "And what am I to you?" Jimin fired back. "Collateral damage." The driver glanced at them in the mirror, then quickly looked away. Jungkook pressed his thumb into his palm, grounding himself, counting the beats of his heart. "They threatened people," he said suddenly. "Not just me, staff, family, anyone close enough to matter." He swallowed. "They showed me how easy it would be." Jimin's anger faltered, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. "You never told me that." "Because if you knew, you'd have done exactly what you did tonight," Jungkook replied. "And I couldn't protect you from it." Jimin laughed softly, bitterly. "Protect me." He leaned closer, eyes burning. "You don't get to decide that alone. You don't get to strip me of the truth and call it love." The car stopped at a red light. Outside, a crowd gathered under umbrellas, phones glowing. Jungkook noticed how some of them were already staring, whispering. The truth was moving faster than he could. "Everything's already leaking," Jimin said, reading his expression. "They clipped the broadcast. They're dissecting every second. There's no putting it back." Jungkook's chest tightened. Panic clawed at his throat. "Then we have to get ahead of it, a statement, controlled, safe." Jimin shook his head slowly. "No more half-truths, no more pretty lies." His voice dropped. "If you speak now, you speak everything." "That could end me," Jungkook said. Jimin's eyes softened, and that somehow hurt worse. "Or it could finally free you." The light turned green. The car moved again. They arrived at Jungkook's apartment under a curtain of rain. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and old coffee. Jungkook locked the door twice without realizing it, then froze, embarrassed. Jimin noticed but said nothing. Jungkook paced, running hands through his hair, breathing uneven. "There was a trainee program," he began, words spilling now that the dam had cracked. "Off the books. They called it mentorship. It was." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They made us sign, silence for success, obedience for protection." Jimin's stomach twisted. "And you were a kid." "I was desperate," Jungkook replied, "and good at pretending I wasn't breaking." Jimin stepped forward, anger flaring anew. "And they're still using it to control you." "Yes." A sharp knock on the door cut through the room. Both of them froze. Jungkook's phone buzzed at the same time. Unknown number. "They're fast," Jungkook muttered. Jimin's heart pounded, but he lifted his chin. "Answer it." Jungkook hesitated, then put it on speaker. "You should be more careful," a calm voice said. "Emotions make people sloppy." Jimin felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Who is this?" A soft chuckle. Someone who kept Jungkook safe when no one else could. Jungkook's fists clenched. "You don't own me anymore." "Don't you?" the voice replied. "Check your email." Jungkook's phone vibrated again. His face drained as he read. Documents, names, threats dressed up as reminders. Jimin stepped beside him, eyes scanning the screen. "This ends now," he said firmly. "We don't negotiate with ghosts." The voice on the line hardened. "Think carefully. One wrong move and the story changes, from brave truth to ugly scandal." Jungkook closed his eyes, shaking. "I won't let you do this again." Then watch everything you love burn, the voice said, and the call ended. Silence swallowed the room. Jungkook sank onto the couch, head in his hands. Breathing ragged. I told you, he whispered. This is what happens. Jimin knelt in front of him, gripping his wrists, forcing him to look up. Tears streaked his cheeks, but his gaze was steady. Listen to me. Whatever they throw at us, we face it together. I didn't expose your truth to abandon you. Jungkook's composure shattered. He leaned forward, forehead pressing into Jimin's shoulder, a sob tearing free after years of restraint. I'm so tired, he choked. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Jimin held him tightly, voice trembling but sure. Then don't be, not tonight, not ever again. Outside, thunder rolled, deep and unforgiving, as if the world itself were responding to a truth finally spoken aloud. Morning arrived without mercy. The rain had stopped, but the city felt louder, sharper, as if every sound carried accusation. Jungkook stood by the window, watching headlines crawl across his phone like wounds reopening, while Jimin brewed coffee he didn't drink, hands shaking despite his effort to stay calm. They're calling it a stunt, Jungkook said, voice flat. A publicity play. They always do this, turn pain into spectacle. Jimin set the mug down too hard. Let them talk. Lies rot faster when you stop feeding them. Jungkook turned, eyes rimmed red from a night without sleep. You say that like rot doesn't take people with it. Before Jimin could answer, the doorbell rang. Not a knock, insistent, official. Jungkook's shoulders tensed. He checked the peephole, exhaled. Legal, he said, and management. Jimin stepped forward. I'm not leaving. I didn't ask you to, Jungkook replied, softer than expected. They sat at the long table, tension thick as dust. The lawyer spoke in controlled tones about risk and exposure, about minimizing damage and protecting assets. The manager's eyes never left Jungkook, calculating, measuring. You issue a statement, the manager said. Carefully worded, you clarify, you deny specifics. Jimin laughed sharp. Deny what? That he was silenced, that he was threatened. The manager bristled. Watch your tone. No, Jimin said, leaning in. You watch yours. You don't get to scold us for refusing to lie. Jungkook closed his eyes, counted to 4, then opened them with a steadiness that surprised even him. I'm not denying anything, he said. I'm done being careful for people who were never careful with me. The lawyer hesitated. Then understand the consequences. I do, Jungkook replied. I've been living them. Silence stretched. Finally, the manager stood, jaw tight. If you go public with details, we can't protect you. Jungkook met his gaze. You never did. They left soon after, the air lighter and heavier all at once. Jimin released a breath he'd been holding for years. You okay? Jungkook nodded slowly. Terrified, he admitted, but clear. By afternoon, the studio lights returned. Different room, different rules. A live press conference. No host to smooth the edges. Just a microphone, a table, and the truth sitting between them like a third presence. Jungkook stepped up first. The flash of cameras made his stomach flip, but he grounded himself the way he'd learned last night, by choosing not to hide. I stayed silent because I was told silence was safety, he said. It was a cage. Murmurs rippled. Questions flew like darts. Name them, someone shouted. Jungkook's jaw tightened. I won't name individuals today, not because I'm afraid, but because this isn't about spectacle. It's about systems that thrive on quiet. Another voice cut in. Are you accusing your company of coercion? Jungkook inhaled. I'm accusing power of abuse when it's unchecked. Jimin stepped forward then, unexpected, taking the microphone with a steadiness born of long frustration. And I'm accusing all of us of believing success excuses harm, he said. I stayed quiet too. That ends now. A reporter scoffed. Convenient timing. Jimin's eyes flashed. Truth doesn't ask permission. The room buzzed. Jungkook watched Jimin with something like awe. This was the courage he'd borrowed last night, now fully claimed. When it ended, they escaped into a back corridor, adrenaline crashing. Jungkook laughed, breathless, a sound he hadn't made freely in years. We really did that. Jimin smiled through tears. You did. Later, as dusk settled, they walked without destination, the city smelling of asphalt and cooling air. Jungkook spoke of nights he'd slept with the lights on, of signatures that felt like shackles. Jimin spoke of loving someone who kept vanishing, of the fear of being too much and never enough. I thought if I pushed, Jimin said, you break. Jungkook shook his head. You pulled, I finally let go. They stopped under a street lamp, its glow warm against the dark. Jungkook took Jimin's hand, not a performance, not a shield, just contact. Whatever comes next, he said, I'm not hiding. Jimin squeezed his fingers. Neither am I. The city moved around them, indifferent and alive, but for the first time the noise didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a witness to two people choosing truth, not because it was safe, but because it was theirs. The night they thought would bring relief instead sharpened everything. Jungkook woke to his phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand, the screen lighting the room in a cold, restless glow. Messages stacked on top of each other, numbers he didn't recognize, names he wished he could forget. Jimin stirred beside him on the couch, hair mussed, eyes snapping open the moment he sensed the tension. It's starting, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin sat up, rubbing his face before leaning closer. Show me. The headline burned. Allegations twisted into rumors, rumors inflated into scandals, anonymous sources, carefully planted doubt. The language was precise, cruelly intelligent. Jungkook felt his stomach drop. They're reframing it, he muttered, making it sound mutual, like I agreed to everything. Jimin's jaw tightened. Of course they are. If they can blur the truth, they don't have to deny it. Another message arrived, this one a photo. Jungkook's breath caught. It was old from years ago, taken in a place he'd buried in his memory. Proof without context. A weapon. They're threatening to release everything, Jungkook said, voice barely audible. They want me to recant. Jimin stood abruptly. No, if they want war, they don't get to fight it in the shadows. Jungkook looked up sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying we stop letting them control the narrative, Jimin replied. We tell the parts you were too scared to say yesterday. Jungkook shook his head. That could destroy people. Some of them were victims too. Jimin softened, stepping closer. Then we protect them. We don't name names, we expose the structure. The room felt too small again. Jungkook paced, hands trembling. You don't understand how deep this goes. I do, Jimin said firmly. I understand what it's like to watch someone you love drown quietly. The words hit harder than any threat. Jungkook stopped moving, his voice broke. I didn't want you dragged into this. Jimin met his gaze, eyes fierce and wet. You didn't drag me. I walked in, I'm staying. By noon, the pressure became physical. Calls from sponsors, meetings canceled, meetings demanded. Jungkook's chest tightened with every ringtone, every vibration. Then the knock came. Not hurried, not aggressive, deliberate. Jungkook opened the door to find a woman standing there, posture perfect, eyes assessing. She smiled like someone used to winning. You don't know me, she said calmly, but I've known you for a long time. Jungkook's blood ran cold. Jimin stepped forward instinctively. This is private property. She glanced at Jimin, unimpressed. So is silence, or it was. Her eyes returned to Jungkook. May I come in? No, Jungkook said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Her smile thinned. Then I'll be brief. We're prepared to make this go away. Jimin laughed harshly. By burying it. By rewriting it, she replied smoothly. A misunderstanding, a young artist overwhelmed, emotional confusion. Jungkook clenched his fists. You don't get to define my life anymore. Her gaze hardened. You're making a mistake. Jimin stepped closer to Jungkook, shoulder to shoulder. No, you did, and now you're scared because people are listening. For a moment, something flickered in the woman's eyes, annoyance, maybe even uncertainty. She exhaled, smoothing her expression. If you continue, she said quietly, everything you've built will be questioned. your credibility, your relationships. Jungkook felt the old fear surge, hot and familiar. Then he felt Jimin's hand brush his, grounding him. Let them question, Jungkook said. His voice shook, but it didn't break. I'd rather be doubted than owned. The woman studied him for a long beat, then nodded once. Very well. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. Truth has consequences. So does silence, Jimin replied. When the door closed, Jungkook's knees nearly gave out. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I'm scared, he admitted, more than I was before. Jimin wrapped his arms around him, pressing his forehead to Jungkook's. That means you're not numb anymore. That evening, Jungkook sat alone in front of a camera. No studio lights, no handlers. Just a room, a lens, and his own reflection. Jimin watched from behind the screen, heart pounding. I was taught that success required obedience, Jungkook said slowly. That gratitude meant silence. I believed that lie for a long time. His eyes glistened. I'm done believing it. He spoke of fear without detailing harm, of contracts without glorifying power, of survival without shame. He spoke like someone reclaiming stolen ground. When he finished, the room was quiet. Jimin stepped forward, voice thick. You didn't hide. Jungkook nodded, tears slipping free at last. I didn't. Outside, the city buzzed, divided and loud, but inside that room something fragile and fierce had taken root. Not certainty, not safety. Truth. And this time, it was spoken on their own terms. The fallout didn't arrive like an explosion. It crept in, quiet and relentless, slipping through cracks Jungkook hadn't known were still open. The video spread faster than anything before it, not clipped, not distorted, whole, uncomfortable, honest. Jungkook watched the numbers climb in silence, his reflection ghosted on the dark screen, while Jimin paced behind him like a storm barely contained. They're split, Jimin said, scrolling furiously. Some believe you, some are tearing you apart, and some are pretending this is all performance art. Jungkook let out a slow breath. That was always going to happen. Jimin stopped packing. No, he said sharply. What was always going to happen is them trying to punish you for speaking. As if summoned by the words, Jungkook's phone rang. A familiar name flashed across the screen. He froze. Don't, Jimin said instantly. You don't owe them anything. Jungkook stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, he answered. You've made a mess, the voice said, calm and disappointed. You were warned. Jungkook's throat tightened. You don't get to speak to me anymore. A pause, then a sigh. You're emotional, we expected that, but this crusade will cost you more than you think. Jimin leaned closer, voice cutting in. You're done intimidating him. The voice chuckled softly. Ah, so it's true, you're his anchor now. Jungkook felt anger flare, hot and sudden. Don't talk about him. Then listen carefully, the voice continued. There are archives you haven't seen, footage, records. If they surface without context, your story won't survive. Jungkook's hand shook. Jimin saw it and grabbed his wrist, grounding him. We're not negotiating, Jimin said. You release anything and you prove his point. Silence on the line stretched thin. You've grown bold, the voice said at last. Boldness fades. The call ended. Jungkook dropped the phone like it burned. His chest heaved as he struggled to breathe. They still think they can scare me back into place. Jimin cupped his face, forcing him to meet his eyes. And are they right? Jungkook searched himself. The fear was still there, deep, scarred, real. But beneath it was something new, anger and resolve. No, he said, they're not. The next days blurred into motion. Statements from former trainees surfaced, not names, not details, patterns, stories that echoed Jungkook without ever touching it directly. The narrative shifted, slowly, painfully. One night, exhausted, Jungkook sat on the floor with his back against the couch, staring at nothing. I keep thinking I should have said something sooner, he murmured. Maybe none of this would have happened. Jimin sat beside him, knees drawn up. Or maybe you would have been crushed before you had the strength to survive it. Jungkook turned to him. How are you not angry at me? Jimin laughed quietly, sadly. I am. Sometimes I was hurt. I felt shut out, but anger isn't the same as regret. He looked Jungkook straight in the eyes. I don't regret standing there with you. Jungkook's voice cracked. I don't know how to deserve that. You don't have to, Jimin replied. Just don't disappear again. Jungkook nodded, a promise settling into his bones. When the invitation came, a live forum, unfiltered, no handlers, everyone advised against it. Jungkook read the message twice, then looked at Jimin. They want me to speak again, he said. Jimin didn't hesitate. Then we go together. The room was packed. No stage, just chairs in a circle, faces watching, waiting. Jungkook felt the familiar urge to armor up to perform. He resisted it. I was taught that silence was professionalism, he began. That gratitude meant compliance. He paused, swallowing. I learned the hard way that silence can also be violence against yourself. A voice from the crowd challenged him. Why now? Jungkook answered without flinching. Because I finally believed I deserved better. Another voice, sharper. And him, a glance toward Jimin. Is this about love or strategy? Jimin stood before Jungkook could stop him. It's about refusing to watch someone I care about disappear behind fear, he said. Call it whatever you want. The room hummed, tense, alive. Jungkook stood too, heart pounding. I'm not asking to be believed blindly, he said. I'm asking for a world where no one is forced to choose between their future and their voice. When it ended, there was no applause, just a long, heavy silence, and then one person stood. Then another, not cheering, standing. Back home, long after midnight, Jungkook sat beside Jimin on the balcony, city lights blinking like distant signals. I'm still scared, Jungkook admitted, but it doesn't own me anymore. Jimin smiled softly, leaning his head against Jungkook's shoulder. That's not fear leaving, that's courage arriving. Jungkook closed his eyes, the night air cool against his skin, and for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like a threat. It felt earned. The final reckoning did not come with sirens or headlines. It arrived quietly, almost gently, on an ordinary afternoon when the city felt unbearably normal. Jungkook was sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling across scattered papers, when the notification appeared. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it, his chest tightening with a familiar reflexive fear that no longer ruled him. The panel's decision was clear. Systemic coercion acknowledged, safeguards mandated, independent oversight enforced. No dramatic language, no names dragged into spectacle, just truth finally recognized in ink and law. Jungkook exhaled, a sound that seemed to empty years from his lungs. It's over, he said softly. Jimin looked up from the window, searching Jungkook's face for doubt, for collapse, for the other shoe to drop. There was none, only exhaustion and something fragile but real beneath it. They can't undo what they did, Jungkook continued, but they can't own it anymore. Jimin crossed the room and sat beside him, their shoulders touching. And you? Jungkook closed his eyes. Images passed through him, bright stages, dark rooms, contracts signed with shaking hands, nights spent convincing himself that silence was strength. He opened his eyes again. I'm still me, he said, but I don't feel split anymore. Outside, the noise of the world continued. Some people still argued. Some still doubted. Some refused to listen at all. But the fear that once made every sound feel like a threat had loosened its grip. Later that evening, they walked through the city without disguises, without urgency. Fans recognized them, some with tears, some with quiet nods, some with nothing but space. And for once, that space felt respectful, not cold. Jimin broke the silence first. Do you ever wish it had gone differently? Jungkook considered the question carefully. I wish I hadn't suffered, he said, but I don't wish I'd stayed silent. Jimin smiled, a small, tired smile full of understanding. I don't either. They stopped at the bridge overlooking the river, lights shimmering across the surface like broken reflections finally settling. Jungkook rested his arms on the railing, breathing in the cool air. I used to think exposure would destroy me, he said. That being seen meant being consumed. And now, Jimin asked. Now I know being seen saved me, Jungkook replied. Because you saw me first, not the version they built, the one underneath. Jimin swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. I was scared I'd lose you that night in the studio. Jungkook turned to him, eyes steady, voice sure. You didn't lose me, you brought me back. They stood there for a long time, no cameras, no scripts, no truths left buried between them. Just two people who had chosen honesty over fear, connection over control. The room had frozen once when the truth was exposed. Now, finally, everything moved again.